Joining me is Lee Sargent. Lee, thank you so much for coming back and talking Trek with me.
Thank you very much for having me, Matt.
Now, today we're going to talk about the original series, where it all got started, this whole franchise. What's your earliest memory of this show?
The Corbomite maneuver. More specifically, the Baylock puppet. I'm not sure if the Baylock puppet had a name or not. I can't remember now. But I have very, very, very vivid memories of seeing that on, like, say, Saturday afternoon TV or something like that on the weekends as a kid, like as a very young child, because it's obviously a very a very kind of iconic image, and it certainly stands out. And I think it was in most of the credits for original series, so that's probably reinforced it whenever I would see the show. So my conscious memories of Star Trek as a child go way back to kind of early days of just being put in front of the TV, because I'm of a certain age where TV was okay to babysit and it wasn't going to do any damage to your child.
I think my earliest memories would be, I would have to show my age here and say that it would be when I bought the DVDs and watched them. I'm sure I might have caught them on TV at some point, but definitely the DVDs and watching them in order.
Wow.
And just seeing the 60s screaming through.
Yeah, wow. I'm really... because I've had them on at least 2 different VHS copies, because there was you could sign up. So back in the early 90s, I'm going to say early 90s, you could actually sign up for a subscription kind of video of the month type of deal with them, and they would send you a tape with 2 episodes on it. And I collected the original series the first time that way. And then a couple of years, probably 97, 98, I'm thereabouts, maybe only 95, they released them all again, but I think they had 3 episodes per tape, and they had very, very cool covers. And I will admit that was the beginning of the completest having to upgrade thing that would happen throughout my life, unfortunately, with Star Trek. So yeah, I think I've owned like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, about 5-6 times now through different formats. I didn't own the Laserdisc, which was good, but I have friends who had bought it. So yeah, wow. So DVD, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
I feel so old.
Well, actually, I was just thinking there where you were talking about the VHSs. I did actually, I was given as a birthday or a Christmas present, there was a box set of all of the pilot episodes.
I remember that. I remember that box set.
I think I still have it somewhere in the cupboard. It had the cage on it. So that would be the very first episode of the original series that I saw, ironically. You know, and Jeffrey Hunter and Captain Pike and all those sort of characters, and just seeing the development, and then actually watching the DVDs and the special edition Blu-rays and seeing that the progression of that series.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the cage, because I remember watching the Menagerie Part 1 and 2, which of course is a splicing of the cage into an original series episode, and not knowing that, and because I was young and as a kid, and there was no internet, and so the only exposure, the only world you had of Star Trek was Star Trek and the novels. Like, there was no kind of, at that age, there was no kind of fanzines available to me and stuff like that. So I remember watching the Menagerie and just going, what is going on here? Like, not understanding why it felt like clearly there's an episode that's been spliced into this, but surely they didn't shoot an entire episode just to splice into this. And so I never really understood that as a kid until I think, one of the sets of, it may have even been that first set that I bought, had the cage remastered. I think it was the 25th anniversary that they did that.
Yeah,
where they kind of remastered it onto VHS and released it properly, and I don't think they had before that. So I had no idea of that, and that was kind of this wonderful innocent period of Star Trek where, you know, you didn't have other people's opinions.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I grew up with it without any, like, in the vacuum of just enjoying Star Trek for what it was, and not and you formed opinions and ideas around kind of what the Federation was, and explained your own canon inconsistencies, but there was no official thing. You just, you know, you went, oh, okay, this would be the reason why there was a uniform change or something like that if you were paying close enough attention as a kid. So yeah, it was a kind of I wouldn't trade that, actually.
It was a beautiful time when you could actually decide yourself how you felt about an episode. I've caught myself recently actually reading online reviews to see how I feel about a certain episode, not just Star Trek, or not just Star Trek, but other shows as well. You know, so it's interesting, and that time, you know, would have been a fantastic period to experience Star Trek, and I wonder whether that it makes for a different breed of fan, maybe.
I think possibly, and I think negatively and positively. I think positively in the fact that, yeah, as I said, I had that experience of not having of having a self identification of Star Trek, but also I think the problem becomes it becomes a little bit more personal, and I think that can. So when you kind of discover as the show goes on, so remembering in the 70s, and that's not, I'm not that old. I'm just saying for people who did know it in the 70s, there was no kind of additional stuff apart from the books and stuff. So no one was telling you that, you know, that a particular thing that you believed was wrong. And then when we got to the movie came out, and of course it was massively different. But in fairness to the movie, and it was that they tried to explain, saying, you know, look, this is all upgraded and this is in the future of the future. But then by the time we kind of get to Next Generation, you've got 7 seasons of a show that's kind of redefining the universe that you were used to, and that you had your own preconceived notions of. I think that's where the potential comes in. We're going, well, no, actually, I have a firm belief of Vulcans act a certain way, and now this is challenged by the very thing that is official, and blah, blah, blah. And that can be very disconcerting for some people, I think. And I think without consciously being kind of angry about that, you can get kind of upset.
Well, Lee, what's your standout moment from the series as a whole? The best episode or the best scene?
I think for me, and I didn't know this until a couple of years ago when I was kind of re-reviewing all of Star Trek, is The Devil in the Dark is definitely my favourite episode. I think it encompasses everything that is Star Trek. And I used to be Corbomite Maneuver was my go-to. This is a perfect Star Trek episode. You've of course got, you know, the face of the unknown. You've got this concept of you know, it's not what it seems. You've got the this concept of wonder, adventure, all that type of stuff. And I really always said Corbomite Maneuver is actually your textbook Star Trek episode. But then watching Devil in the Dark again, and I was really struck by this kind of almost conservation style kind of scientific thing about, you know, Kirk goes to this planet and he and everyone else is convinced that the thing is evil, and then of course they discover it's not evil and it's just protecting its young and all that type of stuff. And Kirk goes on this journey of learning, you know, that the Hoarder is, you know, this strange new life type of thing. And it's with the help of his friends that, of course, gets to that conclusion, and the episode itself is shot so well that's to me the episode that's probably encapsulates the spirit of Star Trek.
Definitely the spirit of Star Trek in terms of action and stuff like that. I think you can't go past, say, episodes in the third season like the Enterprise incident. A classic delving into the lore of Star Trek, or even just creating that lore in the beginning with the Romulans, and oh my goodness, they look exactly like Spock, and all this kind of crazy stuff. You've got the second season where they really sort of honed in on 20th century issues, with the Omega Glory and other episodes like that. I'm sure that there was a Nazi episode in there as well. I'm just quickly scanning through the Patterns of Force. Thank you. And then of course second season you can't go past the Trouble with Tribbles for a bit of comic relief.
You see, I think a lot of people, because like a lot of people will say that the best episode of Star Trek is The City on the Edge of Forever, and I agree that it's an exceptional episode. Like, it is an extraordinary performance. Extraordinary story. I know that there was, that the story changed a lot between Harlan Ellison's original and what got on screen, but I have to argue that what got on screen really, really works for Star Trek. There's only one line in that whole episode that I would raise an eyebrow at, and that was purely Uhura saying, "I'm scared, Captain," and it's just like, it's a product of its time, and it's unnecessary. But again, this is a character-driven piece, which again is a perfect thing for Star Trek. But it's not your perfect Star Trek episode, if that makes sense in my mind.
That it's the spirit, I think. And that's where The Devil in the Dark really sort of encapsulates that spirit.
There's a science exploration. There's that element of kind of the unknown, overcoming fears, which again is a common theme throughout Star Trek, which is this kind of we fear what we don't understand, and we also there's prejudices. It's interesting you mentioned the Omega Glory, because it's probably one of my least favorite episodes, simply because it's just it doesn't date very well, because it's so aligned with them trying to make some sort of Americana message. It really doesn't work for me.
And it was all about the fountain of youth.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
it
was crazy,
wasn't it? It's not, because there's other episodes like the Alternative Factor and stuff, which are considered to be really quite bonkers and not very good. There's glimmers in those episodes that I like, and whereas I don't think Omega Glory, because I only watched it semi recently, and I was just struck by how awfully cringeworthy the end is, and even kind of some of it within it. It's just like, but then like other people will say Spocks Brain is like the worst episode, and I disagree completely. I don't have a problem with the Spocks Brain episode. There's things in the episode which obviously you go, oh God, really? They remove Spock's brain. But the whole concept of the episode's pretty sound. It's this, the idea that their medical science is so much more advanced than ours. And of course, you have this kind of whole cool scene with McCoy putting on the learning helmet and knowing how to put a brain back into a Vulcan's body, and then losing that knowledge as it starts to wear off and stuff. I always find that very, very good, and I don't kind of get. I understand the remote control Spock is it is what it is. The ticking noise and stuff like that. But I kind of go, okay, well, is this really the silliest? Is it really the silliest you've seen on TV?
Yeah, exactly right.
You have to stretch it. It's the same as the special effects for original series. You have to kind of forgive them for what they are, and they're not like, you don't go to the theatre, you don't go to see Shakespeare and complain about the cardboard sets, and say I completely didn't believe they were there because it's clearly that wasn't a real tree behind them, and it's like. Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head by saying it was a product of the time, and I think every Star Trek series has been a product of the time, both in terms of the way they look and the way that they tell the stories. And I think, we'll cover all of those as we go through the franchise. But Lee, as a final question for you, because we're out of time, someone hasn't seen Star Trek before, they want to dive into the original series. Which episode do you recommend they start with?
Corbomite Maneuver. I think Corbomite Maneuver is a very accessible episode. I think Devil in the Dark is a great episode, but I think you need to... I think you need an inkling of the relationship between the characters to really love it. But the Corbomite Maneuver is a really great episode to encapsulate what Star Trek's all about.
Fantastic. Lee, thank you so much for talking Trek with me.
Thank you for having me.